Today we are going through this lab sheet 1944 on the building of a switch network and a router, a switch and router network. So on the left-hand side, you can see the devices. There is a PCA, a switch 1, a R1, and a PCB. What we need to do over here for this lab, we need to configure the IP information on the PC, the router and switch, and also to verify the network connectivity and so on. So the first thing we need to do is we need to cable the devices together. So let's go over to our network here. For PCA, I need to go to switch 1. So I go to my connections menu, look for my straight through copper cable, select, and then click on the PCA, select fast Ethernet 0. After that, the next end connect to the switch and select fast Ethernet 01. Okay, once connected, the cable will start to initialize. Next, we are going to connect the switch to the router. So switch, let's go over to the connections menu. Select copper straight through again. And then go to my switch. Select the gigabit Ethernet 01. And then for the router side, select the gigabit Ethernet 001. Okay, so this is what is mentioned in the lab sheet. So unlike the PC and the switch S1 and the R1 will not configure because there is no IP information yet. That's why the cable is still red color. Lastly, we are going to configure the PCB and the R1. So which is this one over here. So let's go over to my PCB, select copper straight through, and then go to my PCB, select fast Ethernet 0. For the other end, the router, select G000. So same thing, the IP information not connected, so it will stay red color for now. Okay, so we have done the connection step 1. So let's go over to the step 2 to configure the IP addresses for the PCs. So let's start off with PCA. So for my PCA, I have the following information. Click on PCA. And then select desktop IP information. And then key in the IP addresses. And my subnet mask is 1.1. Okay, so before I continue, just double check and make sure my addresses are correct. Okay, I'm okay with this configuration for PCA, so I'll just close the window. Next, I'll configure the IP information for PCB. Select desktop tab, IP information. and configure the respective IP addresses. So for PCB is this row over here. Oops. Okay, so before I continue, just double check, make sure all of the addresses are correct. Okay, once okay, close the window. So I'm done with PCA and PCB. So next, I'm going to configure the, okay, according to the lab sheet, let's try to ping the PCB from PCA. So let's go over to my PCA, and then I will try to ping the PCB. So the PCB address is 192.168.0.3. So let's do that. Ping. Okay, as you can see, the ping is not successful. The reason can also be seen from the network. So if you notice on the network, PCA to S1 is green color. Switch 1 to R1, router 1 is red. And router R1 to PCB is also red. That means the connection between PCA and PCB are not established. That's why you are unable to ping PCA to PCB. Okay, so the answer for this part, not successful, obviously, because they were not connected. So next, we go over to the R1. Okay, so let's console into the router. Okay, so I'm going to use the PCA to connect to, sorry, PCB to connect to my R1. So in order to connect to my R1, I will use a console cable. Under the connections menu, select the blue color cable console. And then from the PCB, select RS232. And then for the other end, click to the R1 and select console. So once this is done, you should see the connection, something like this. So we are good to connect to R1 through PCB. So let's click on PCB. And from the PCB itself, select terminal. And then click OK, the default setting. And on the PCB terminal, you should be able to see the text, something like this. So you can just scroll to the bottom, press enter to start, and we will be able to see the router prop. Okay. So now we are in the router itself. So let's enable into the privilege exec mode. So over here, we just type the command enable, press enter. And now notice the prompt has changed to a hash sign. This means that it is in the privilege mode. Okay, so next we are going to enter the configuration mode. So let's go over to my prompt here. Type the command configure terminal. Press enter. And now my prompt has changed. This shows that my router is currently in the global configuration mode. Because the prompt has changed to a bracket config. So next, we go and assign a device name to the router according to the addressing table. So let's go to the addressing table at the top. So according to the addressing table, your router is known as R1. So let's change this host name of the router to R1. So for this part, we go over here. And under the configuration mode, we type host name R1. And then we press enter. Notice now your prompt for the router has changed into R1. This shows that your host name is updated to R1 itself. Next, we are going to configure the privilege exact encrypted password as class. So going to the router R1, we type this command, enable secret. The password for this case is mentioned in the lab sheet for class. Okay, so the encrypted privilege exact password is called class. So let's type in the password class. Press enter. We are done with this part. So this is the command that we use to encrypt the privilege exact password. So next, part E, we are going to configure the console password as Cisco. So to do that, we'll type in the command line console 0, press enter. And after that, we type in the password we want to configure. Password. And let's look at the question. So the question says the password is Cisco. So we're going to change the password to Cisco. Press enter. And before we end the console configuration, we need to define the console password at the login, which is specified here at the login stage. So just type in the keyword login, press enter, and now we are done. So these 3 lines will configure the console password as Cisco at the login stage. Okay, once we are done, we can exit to go back to the previous menu. Okay, so we are done with part E. So let's take a look at part F. So part F, requires us to encrypt the plain text password. So to do that, we'll go over here and type in this command, service password dash encryption. Press enter. And that's it. So this command here will perform the encryption for all the passwords in R1. So we're done with part F. So let's go over to part G. So part G says we need to create a banner to warn any user when accessing the device, unauthorized access is prohibited. So let's create a banner. Banner MOTD or message of the day, followed by the hex sign. So press enter. You can start to key in the message. So according to the question in the lab sheet, the message is unauthorized access is prohibited. So let's type in this message. Okay, so once I finish typing the message, I can end the message with another hex sign. And then the message is completed. So this is the command to enter the message of the day banner message. Okay, so we are done with this part G. So now part H, we are going to configure the IP addresses inside the addressing table. So we'll do that to the R1. So for R1, there are two interfaces. So let's take a look at the first interface, G000. Okay, to do that, we are going to configure the IP information for G000. So the command to do that is interface. G stands for Gigabit Ethernet 0/0/0. Press enter. You will enter the interface. And from the interface, let's define the IP address. IP address for our 0.1, sorry. And then the subnet mask. Once this is done, press enter. So double check your IP address, make sure it's correct. Okay, so that's for R1. Before we continue, we need to enable the interface with the no shutdown command. And you should see the interface is now changed to up state. So that's for G000. You can get back to the previous menu, type exit. So now we are done with the G000. Next, we are going to configure the next interface, G001. So G001, same thing. Let's go over to the interface. Press enter. Then we define the IP address. Let me double check the IP address. With the subnet mask. Okay, so make sure all the addresses are correct. Press enter. And just like before, we need to enable the interface. No shutdown. And once we enable the interface, we can see the status change to up. So we can exit this setting and go back to the previous menu. So we have completed the configuration of the IP for G00 and G001. So that's for the step H. Okay, we have done step H of step 3. Okay, 3H. Step I requires us to save the running config to the startup config. So we go back to the menu. From here, let's type exit to go back to the privilege mode. From the privilege mode, type this command, copy running config to the startup config. This command will back up or save the running config into a permanent config called startup config file. Press enter. They will prompt me, do I want to change the name, or I can use the default name, startup config. So I will use the default name, just press enter, and it will be saved to this startup config file. So I'm done with my step I. So were the ping successful? Okay, let's try to ping from PC A to PCB. Okay, let's try again. So let me minimize this window R1. So we have noticed the interfaces have become green color for all the 3 links. So let's try to ping from PCA to PCB. So PCA, and I go to command prompt. Okay, just now PCA, I tried to ping my PCB, wasn't successful. So let's try again. Okay, this time round, you can see that my ping command is able to reach PCB because out of the 4 packets, 3 of them are received. If I run the command again, I should be able to receive 100% zero loss. Okay, so this confirms that I can ping PCA to PCB. So the answer for this question in the lab sheet, yes, I can ping. Why? Because all the interfaces are configured. So now we are done with R1. So step 3, we'll go over to step number 4, configure switch S1. So same thing as before, we'll go to S1. So in order to control S1, we will need to use a console cable. So I'll go to my connections menu, select the console cable, and then from the PCA, select RS232, And then for the other end, connect to the switch S1. Select console. So once this is done, you should see the connection like this. So let's try to connect to S1 through PCA. Select PCA and then select terminal. Okay. So this is my switch S1 through the PCA console. So just go to the bottom, press enter. So now I'm able to connect to the switch S1 on the PCA. So same thing, I'm going to configure the bunch of information such as your host name and the passwords and so on. So let's start off with the host name of the switch. So according to the table, the host name, let's enter the privilege mode first. So enable to enter the privilege mode. So now we are inside privilege mode. We key in the host name. Sorry, we need to go into the global configuration mode. Configure terminal. So now, after configure terminal, I able to go into the global configuration mode. Global configuration. So this is the global configuration mode. Okay, next, we are going to configure the host name. To S1. Okay, so switch to S1. Press enter. And now the prompt has also updated to the new hostname S1. So next, on my switch, I want to configure the privilege mode, privilege exact encrypted password. So to do that, you just type in the command. Okay, so enable secret, the password according to lab sheet is class. So this will be how I configure the privilege mode secret password. Next, I go over to my step E and configure the console password and enable login. Same as your Cisco router, we go over to the line console 0. And then on the console line, I define my password as Cisco. And then to make sure the password is enabled for the login page, I type in the keyword login. Okay, once this is done, I can exit the console configuration mode. And this is done for the console line password. Okay, so we have done for step E. Okay, step F, we need to encrypt the plain text password. Same as your R1, we configure the command service password dash encryption. And then I will encrypt all the plain text password in this switch S1. Okay, next, I'm done with step F. Next, I'm going to configure the banner. Okay, just like the router, I need a banner. Unauthorized access is prohibited. So let's do that. Banner, message of the day, MOTD, delimiter hex sign, press enter. So key in the message, unauthorized access is prohibited. Once this is done, close it with another hex sign. Press enter. So now my message is configured. MOTD. So I'm done with step number G. So let's go over to my step H to configure the IP for VLAN 1. Okay, so let's go over to the addressing table and look for my VLAN 1. So my VLAN 1, the IP address is 1.2 and gateway is 1.1. So let's go over to my interface, VLAN 1. So now inside my interface for VLAN 1, notice the from has updated to -F. Type in the IP address. Okay, just double confirm again the IP address. IP address is correct, so subnet mask. And press enter. So this will configure the IP address for VLAN 1. And next, going to configure the default gateway. Okay, so let's define the default gateway for the switch. According to the addressing table, default gateway is 1.1. Okay, so let's go to the switch IP default gateway. Press enter, and I will define my default gateway. Okay, so I'm done for the switch. S1. And finally, save the running config to the startup config. So to do that, let me exit to the privilege boot, copy running config to the startup config. That's all for switch 1. So I've done with the switch 1, part J. So I'm ready to continue to finish the rest of the lab. Some information I need to gather before I finish this lab sheet. First, I need to check the hardware and software version. So let's go over to my R1. So I can close this, go to my R1 PCB, and then select terminal. So under my R1, I can try to enter the R1 now. Login password, if you remember, is your Cisco. So now I'm inside R1. I can enter the privilege mode, enable. It will ask me for password again. So this is my class password. So this message here, this message here is your MOTD message of the day. And then the password we have over here, this is your console password. And then this password you over here, this is known as your privilege exam mode, the secret password. Okay, so three things we see over here. So now we can type this command, show version, and then we can see the information of this router. So the lab sheet asks for the following information. What is the name of the iOS image for the router? So for the iOS image, you can look for this file over here. So this is the image name, ISR 4300. So this is the image name for the router. Okay, so next we are going to check the switch. Okay, so same thing, let's go over to the switch. For switch, we go to PCA. And then for PCA, we go to terminal. And we should be able to see the switch information. Okay. So from here, same thing, we key in the command show version. And you will also see a lot of information regarding the switch. Same thing for the switch, we are asked to check what is the iOS software image version running on the switch. So iOS file image is this file over here. Okay, so this is the image file, C2960 land-based M. So this is the version of the software running inside switch 1. What is the model number of the switch? Okay, model number of switch is over here, WSC2960-24TT. So this is my model number for the switch S1. So I'm done with these two questions, step 1. So let's go on to step 2. So step 2, we are asked to key in this command, show IP routes. So we go over to R1, which is through PCB. So for PCB, we can see R1 here. So R1, they will prompt me for more information. So R1, I need to check the command, show IP route, which is the routing table. So let's see, show IP routes. So over here, you can see the routing table for R1. The routing table are over here. Notice that some of the statement here, this is considered a route. Okay, the C represents connected. Okay, C connected means it is directly connected to the router and the PC through gigabit Ethernet 000. You also have another directly connected link to gigabit 001. And then you have another route, which is 0.1 through this route on the gigabit Ethernet 001. And another link over here. So total 4 routes here. So let's try and answer the question. What code is used in the routing table to indicate a directly connected network? Okay, directly connected network is this. Okay, C. C is the code. Directly connected network. So answer here is C. So this answer here is directly connected network C. Okay. Yes.
How do we answer
Paper.
right?
Yes. How many route entries are coded with a C in the routing table? So as mentioned just now, you have 2 routes. The first one is here, directly connected. The second one is here. So there are a total of 2 routes are directly connected. So answer over here is 2. Okay, so let's go on. Next question in the lab sheet, what interface types are associated with the C route, connected route? So the interface type is this interface, gigabit Ethernet interface. So first one, gigabit Ethernet 000. The next interface is gigabit Ethernet 001. Okay, so answer here is gigabit Ethernet. Okay, so we are done with this. So let's go on to the interface information. Okay, in view of time, I think we will just skip over some of the commands. So show IP route basically will show you the routing table. Show interfaces will show you the interface information. So let's try to go to R1 and show interfaces G001. Right. Press enter. You will see all these info that are listed. So let's try to identify some info. What is the operation status of G001? Operational status is up. So this is the answer for operational status. Gigabit Ethernet is up. So this is the first answer. The answer is up. Okay, next we go to the question. What is the media access control MAC address for G001? So the MAC address or the media access control address. So let's go over there and see G001. The MAC address is listed here. So this is your MAC address. Okay, so let's go on. We're done with this. How is the internet address displayed in this command? So internet address is shown here. 192.168.1.1/24. Okay, we're done with this. Let's take a look at step 4. Display a summary list on the interfaces on the router. You can use this command to display the interface for the router and also this command for the switch. Okay, so you should be able to get the information like this. Okay, let's go on to the part 3. Secure remote access to the router. Okay, so let's go to the router R1. Okay, for router R1, we want to configure the SSH. So now we enter this command, IP domain name academy.net. So let's key in this command, IP domain name academy.net. Press enter. So this will be my domain name for this router R1. So next, I want to configure my encryption key. Okay, crypto key generate RSA. So let's try crypto key generate RSA. Press enter. They will ask you to key in the number of bits for your encryption key. So according to the lab sheet, encryption key is 1024. So let's key in 1024. And the RSA encryption key will be generated. So next, we go over to the BTY line to configure the SSH user. So we go over to my R1 and then configure a new user called SSH user and password is Cisco. So let's go over here and key in the username. SSH user secret. The password is called Cisco. So now I have a new user called SSH user whose password is called Cisco. Okay, and now I'm going to configure the terminal line. So let's go over to my line BTY04. Okay, 04. Press enter. Now I'm in the BTY line menu. Select login local to use the device local RSA key. Press enter. And next, I'm going to define the SSH only access for remote transport input SSH. So now I have defined the input, only valid input is SSH. Telnet will not be allowed. So once this is done, we can actually exit this terminal. Exit. And now we are ready to test our SSH connection. So let's go over to my PCA and enter the command prompt. So from my PCA, from the PCA, I go to command prompt. From the command prompt, I'm going to access the SSH menu. So let's say just type SSH press enter. You can see the usage for the SSH command. So now let's key in the command SSH-L. Username just now, if you remember, is SSH user. Target the IP address for the R1 switch. R1, sorry. R1 is this IP address. Press enter. They will prompt you for the password. And if you remember correctly, just now the password was Cisco. Press enter. And notice now you managed to log into the R1 router. And you can see the message of the day. Unauthorized access is prohibited. So now I managed to remotely access the R1 router through my PCA. Okay. So from the diagram point of view, you can see that I am now able to connect from PCA to PCA through S1 to R1, even though I'm at PCA is not directly connected to R1. So I can actually remotely connect the R1 to the internet, okay, using SSH. Okay, so that's basically the main thing. So display message is your MOTD. Okay, unauthorized access is prohibited. What should be the prompt of R1 is R1. Okay, so you can actually continue to connect to R1 over here. So that's all for this lab.